In January of 1972, two missing brothers walked out of the Pennsylvania woods after being gone for 91 days. They were alive, uninjured, wearing the same clothes they vanished in, and for a brief moment the nation celebrated a miracle. But what those boys later confessed didn't just end the search, it destroyed. The entire investigation shattered a town and left behind a truth so disturbing that federal records were sealed for decades. Because Michael and Daniel Reeves didn't say they were kidnapped. They didn't claim they escaped. They said they went willingly. They said something beneath the abandoned Chamberlain house invited them, taught them, changed them. And when authorities finally searched the place they described, they found evidence that should not have existed: blood without bodies, tunnels without records, symbols no historian could identify. What they didn't know was that this confession would turn the boys from victims into suspects, their family into outsiders, and their small town into the center of one of the strangest, unsolved cases in American history. Tonight, you're about to hear the version of the case most documentaries never show: who the boys were before they vanished, what was found beneath that house, and why more than 50 years later, children are still disappearing within 100 miles of where it all began. Before we continue, tell us in the comments what state you're watching from. Millertown, Pennsylvania sits in the northern folds of the state where the forests grow thick and the roads grow thin. In 1971, fewer than 500 people lived there. One blinking traffic light, one diner, one church, one school. A place where names carried histories and every unfamiliar face was noticed. It was the kind of town where nothing ever really changed, and where nothing truly stayed hidden. The Reeves family lived just outside town limits, in a weather-beaten farmhouse bordered by woods on 3 sides. Dorothy Reeves worked part-time at the town library. Her husband, Thomas, had died in a logging accident 5 years earlier, leaving her to raise their 2 sons alone. Michael, 12, was quiet and thoughtful, the kind of boy who read ahead in class and asked questions adults didn't always know how to answer. Daniel, 9, was restless, curious, always testing boundaries. Together, they walked home from school every afternoon along County Road 14, a cracked ribbon of asphalt, winding through dense trees and rolling fields. On Thursday, October 21, 1971, the boys left school at 3:18 p.m., just like any other day. Several classmates later confirmed seeing them turn onto County Road 14 together, their book bags slung over their shoulders. The sky was low and gray. The air smelled of falling leaves and cold rain. By 4:30, when they still hadn't come home, Dorothy assumed they had stopped at a nearby farm to look at newborn calves, something the boys often did. By 5:30, anxiety set in. By 6:15, panic took over. When the first search teams were assembled, flashlights cut through the early evening, fog while boots crunched over wet leaves. Neighbors fanned out through the woods calling the boys names. Local police searched the road shoulders, the ditches, the shallow creeks. As darkness fell, the temperature dropped, and with it, hope. No footprints were found, no torn clothing, no discarded books. By midnight, the state police were called. By morning, the FBI was en route. Within 48 hours, Millertown became unrecognizable. News vans lined the single main street. Helicopters thudded over the treetops. Bloodhounds combed the forest floor until their paws bled. Reporters interviewed sobbing neighbors. Dorothy Reeves appeared on television, clutching photographs of her sons with shaking hands. Her voice steady only because it had gone numb. She repeated the same sentence again and again. If they can hear me, I want them to know I'm waiting. What the town didn't know yet was that this case was already becoming strange. Search dogs tracked the boys, sent for nearly a mile along County Road 14 before it stopped abruptly at the edge of the forest. Not faded, not scattered, simply gone. As if the boys had stepped off the surface of the world. Ground searches revealed no signs of struggle. No drag marks, no blood, no tire tracks. The disappearances made no practical sense. As days turned into weeks, fear fermented into rumor. Some residents whispered about passing drifters, others about hunters who knew hidden trails. A few spoke in hushed voices about the old Chamberlain house, abandoned since 1959 and swallowed by trees at the northern edge of town. Teenagers dared each other to touch its door after dark. They swore you could hear sounds beneath the floor if you stood still long enough. Most dismissed it as folklore. But folklore has a way of growing teeth when real children vanish. By November, the forests were bare. By December, the ground froze solid. The searches slowed, then stopped altogether. The reporters left. The helicopters vanished. The investigation officially remained open, but in truth, it had begun to rot. Inside the Reeves home, silence replaced hope. Dorothy kept the boys' bedroom doors open. Their unmade beds gathered dust. Every morning she brewed 3 cups of coffee by habit before catching herself. Every night she left the porch light on. Then winter settled fully over Millertown. Heavy snow, iron skies, air so cold it burned to breathe. By January, most people quietly assumed the boys were dead. And then, on the morning of January 18, 1972, a dairy farmer named Ernest Kowalski saw 2 figures walking along the tree line at dawn, 7 miles north of where the boys disappeared. They were moving with unnatural precision, not stumbling, not weak, walking. 2 small figures emerging from the frozen woods, coming back from a place no one had been looking anymore. And what Millertown was about to learn would be far worse than the fear it had already endured. To understand what happened to the Reeves boys, you have to understand the people at the center of the story, because what each of them carried into this case shaped how it unfolded and how it ultimately collapsed. Dorothy Reeves was 38 years old when her sons disappeared, widowed, overworked, quietly exhausted. She had grown up in Millertown and never left. Her husband, Thomas Reeves, had been killed in a logging accident in 1966 when a cable snapped and crushed his chest in front of 3 co-workers. After that, Dorothy became known as Strong, the word small towns use when they don't know how else to describe surviving grief. She worked mornings at the town library, evenings cleaning offices. At home she was gentle but distant, a mother who loved deeply yet seemed permanently afraid of losing what she had left. Friends later said she watched her boys, the way someone watches a candle, in a drafty room always, expecting the flame to go out. Michael Reeves was 12 when he vanished. He was not like most boys in Millertown. He read books meant for older kids. He asked uncomfortable questions in Sunday school. He spent hours alone in the woods sketching animals and structures in a notebook. That was never found. Teachers described him as intelligent but withdrawn, polite but unreachable. One classmate later recalled that Michael once said very calmly, "Some things older than people still live in the ground." At the time, everyone laughed. Daniel Reeves, 9 years old, was Michael's shadow, louder, faster, more impulsive. He followed his brother everywhere, mimicking his speech, his posture, even his silences. While Michael looked inward, Daniel looked outward. He wanted to be seen. He wanted to be chosen. Neighbors described him as the kind of child who trusted adults instantly and completely. That trait would later haunt the investigation. Then there was Ernest Kowalski, the farmer who found them. 56 years old, Polish immigrant, Korean War veteran, widower, a man who trusted routine more than people. Every morning for 15 years, he walked his property line before sunrise, checking fences and livestock. On January 18, 1972, he broke that routine when he saw 2 figures moving along his tree line with mechanical precision. He would later tell investigators that what terrified him most wasn't that the boys had returned. It was that they did not react to him at all. It was like they were following something I couldn't see, he said. The federal lead on the case was Special Agent Howard Brennan. 17 years with the FBI, 23 cases involving missing or abused children. Brennan believed in patterns, psychology, and procedure. He had seen children lie to protect abusers. He had seen children invent monsters to survive human cruelty. He believed everything had a rational explanation if you stripped enough layers away. The Reeves boys were the first case that made him doubt that philosophy. Brennan noted in his private journal that both boys displayed a synchrony of affect rarely observed outside of controlled psychological conditioning. They spoke alike. They moved alike. They even blinked at almost identical intervals. The longer he interviewed them, the more unsettled he became, not by what they said at first, but by how little of themselves seemed present when they said it. Then there was Vera Chamberlain. Though she had died in 1959, her shadow clung tightly to the case. She had lived alone in the large Victorian home at the edge of the woods. after her husband's death in the 1930s. Locals described her as reclusive, deeply religious, and intensely private. Children had been warned for decades to stay away from her property. Some claimed she chased trespassers with a broom. Others said lights still burned in her house years after her death. No will was found. No heirs claimed the land. The house simply remained, slowly sinking into the forest. Small towns remember their ghosts. At the school, reactions to the boys' return split the community. Some teachers treated them with fragile sympathy. Others kept their distance. One fourth-grade teacher requested reassignment after Daniel returned to her classroom. She later told a colleague, "It felt like he was looking through me instead of at me." Even among the police division formed, Sheriff Paul Hanley, who had grown up in Millertown, wanted to treat the boys strictly as victims. The state investigators were less certain. The FBI was deeply conflicted. Once the boys began describing going willingly, once they spoke of being invited instead of taken, the question no one wanted to ask began hovering in every closed-door meeting. Were the Reeves boys victims or participants? And perhaps the most disturbing character in this entire story was the only one no one could properly define, the figure the boys called the shepherd, an entity that never appeared in any official record, a presence known only through identical testimony from two traumatized children who had spent 91 days somewhere no map could explain. As these people collided, grieving mother, changed children, hardened investigator, forgotten recluse, and a town choking on fear, the foundation of the case began to crack. And soon those cracks would expose something no one was prepared to see. For 16 days after the Reeves boys returned to Millertown, the town lived in a strange emotional paralysis. Relief and unease existed side by side. Church bells had rung. Neighbors had brought food. Reporters briefly returned. But behind the public celebration, a darker current was forming because Michael and Daniel still refused to explain where they had been. Doctors ran test after test, blood work, x-rays, neurological exams. Everything came back normal. Too normal. No signs of starvation, no frostbite, no physical trauma consistent with 3 winter months in the wilderness. What they didn't know was that the physical mystery would soon be overshadowed by something far worse. On February 3, 1972, Special Agent Howard Brennan resumed formal interviews. The session began under standard protocol in a secured room at the county building. Michael sat perfectly straight in his chair, hands flat on the table, eyes forward. Brennan began slowly, testing for stress responses. Michael answered politely, calmly, without hesitation. That alone unsettled Brennan. Children who had survived trauma usually showed fear, resistance, agitation. Michael showed discipline. Then Brennan asked the turning question. "Michael, where were you for those 91 days?" The boy did not blink. "We went where we were invited," he said. What they didn't know was that this single sentence would fracture the entire case. Minutes later, Michael described their destination, the place under the old house at the edge of town. When Brennan asked what old house, Michael replied without being prompted, "The Chamberlain house." The room went silent. The name had never been mentioned to the boys by investigators. It was not recorded in any public briefings. It had surfaced only in rumors. Brennan halted the interview and brought Daniel in separately. The result was worse. Daniel repeated his brother's account almost word for word. Same phrases, same pacing, same emotionless delivery. But Daniel added a detail that caused even seasoned agents to exchange glances. "The one who invited us wore other faces." Brennan pressed him to explain. Daniel said the visitor sometimes looked like their father, sometimes like the town pastor, sometimes like strangers who felt familiar. But underneath, Daniel said softly, there wasn't a face at all. What they didn't know was how deep this statement would reach into the investigation. Within hours, the Chamberlain property was reopened as a central point of interest. Deputies who had avoided the place for years were ordered to secure it. Local teens who once dared each other to approach its porch now watched, from a distance as floodlights were positioned, and yellow tape wrapped around rusted fence posts. On February 6th, state police, the FBI, and forensic specialists entered the structure. The interior was exactly what decades of abandonment would suggest: collapsed floors, blackened walls, animal remains. Broken furniture fused to the rot. But in the kitchen, beneath layers of warped wood and mold, they found something that had not decayed. A reinforced oak door hidden beneath a rotten rug. The hinges moved despite 13 years of neglect. When the door was forced open, cold air rushed upward with such intensity that 2 officers recoiled. It did not smell like decay. It smelled like stone, wet minerals, something sealed for a long time. The hinges moved despite 13 years of neglect. When the door was forced open, cold air rushed upward with such intensity that 2 officers recoiled. It did not smell like decay. It smelled like stone, wet minerals, something sealed for a long time. What they didn't know was that everything about the case was about to change direction. Stone steps descended into darkness. The underground chamber beneath the house was larger than the structure. Above it, a physical impossibility on official maps. Tool marks were carved into the bedrock walls. Handprints appeared at irregular intervals. At one point, a child's shoe was found fused into hardened mud, unidentifiable by brand or time period. 200 feet down the main passage, the tunnel opened into a circular chamber approximately 30 feet across. The ceiling vanished into shadow. Symbols covered the walls deep. Deliberate carvings arranged in repeating patterns no one present could identify. In the center of the chamber was a recessed depression stained dark brown and black. Forensics later confirmed human blood, multiple donors, ages impossible to determine. What they didn't know was that there would be no bodies, no skeletal remains, no clothing fragments, no evidence of extended habitation. The cadaver dog showed no sustained interest. Ground-penetrating radar revealed no additional tunnels. According to physical evidence alone, the boy's story should have collapsed at that moment. But then the dating reports arrived. Preliminary estimates placed some of the wall carvings anywhere between the early 1700s and the mid-1800s, yet no historical records of any underground structure existed. Indigenous oral histories from regional tribes revealed no legend of a site like this. It was as if the place had existed beyond documented memory. Inside interrogation rooms, Michael and Daniel continued to provide consistent descriptions of rooms and figures that investigators could not physically verify. The boys described children who had been there for a very long time, some recent, some ancient. When shown photographs of known missing children from the region, their reactions were minimal, but occasionally, one of them would quietly say, "He was there," or "She didn't go back up." What they didn't know was that every confirmation increased fear as much as doubt. The FBI grew divided. Some agents believed the boys had been abducted, abused, and psychologically conditioned to create a shared fantasy. Others believed the physical evidence did not match that explanation. And a third, silent group said nothing at all but stopped sleeping. Meanwhile, Millertown began to whisper again. Neighbors noticed the boys walking at night, standing at the edge of the woods behind their farmhouse. Just watching. Dorothy locked doors she had never locked before. Parents pulled their children indoors when Michael and Daniel passed by. The sense that something had returned with the boys was no longer confined to interrogation rooms. It was spreading. The full confession of Michael and Daniel, Reeves, was never released to the public in its entirety. What remains today comes from sealed interview summaries, leaked memoranda, and the personal notes of Special Agent Howard Brennan. When those fragments are assembled, they form a picture so disturbing that many who reviewed the file later questioned whether the truth had been buried to protect the public or to protect reality itself. According to the boys, the invitation came on the afternoon they disappeared. They said the man appeared on County Road 14 just past the tree line. He looked familiar at first, safe, someone they trusted. The boys described feeling an instant calm in his presence, like fear had been switched off inside their minds. He offered them no physical force, no threats, only a choice. He told them there was another place beneath the town, a place where the world was older, a place where children did not have to grow weak or die, a place where truth could be learned without lies or punishment. They followed him into the woods willingly. What they didn't fully understand until later, they said, was that they were not being led across land. They were being led downward. They described a concealed entrance beneath the abandoned house, accessed through the reinforced door investigators later discovered. Beyond it, stone steps spiraled deeper than the boys could count. Time, they said, stopped working correctly underground. Days felt like minutes. Minutes like years. The air was cold, but they never felt cold. Their bodies did not weaken. They were not hungry in the way hunger is normally felt. They were not prisoners. They were students. The shepherd, as they called him, did not remain in one form. Daniel said he wore faces like clothes for the mind, familiar. Faces made trust easier, but when he taught, the face disappeared. Then what stood before them was not human at all. Not animal, something shaped like intention rather than flesh. The lessons were not spoken in words. The boys said they were shown how to quiet their thoughts until pain vanished. How to see without light. How to hear the moment life leaves a body. How to recognize lies not by sound but by vibration. Michael described it as learning a language that existed before mouths existed. They also said they were not alone. Other children moved through the tunnels. Some newly arrived and still frightened. Others who had forgotten their names, their parents, their surface lives. The boys described these children with clinical detail. One with pale, translucent skin who no longer breathed the way humans do. Another with empty eye sockets who navigated the tunnels without hesitation. Twins who shared one heartbeat between two bodies. According to Michael, some children tried to return to the surface and could not. Others were sent back when they were ready. The criteria for readiness was never clearly defined, only that it was rare. When investigators asked the boys about death, both responded in the same calm tone. Death is only for the surface. The most disturbing revelation came when Brennan asked what the shepherd wanted in return. Michael answered without pause. To continue, he said Millertown had given children to the tunnels for generations, that the town itself acted like a slow, unaware feeder. The missing were not all taken by force. Some were lost, some were lured, some followed voices they trusted too easily, and some were sent back. The purpose of sending them back was not mercy. It was access. They walk among you, Daniel said, referring to those who had returned before them. You just don't know what they have learned yet. When Brennan asked why they themselves were sent back, the answer chilled the room. To see if we could still live as humans, Michael said, and to see how many others would notice the door. Brennan wrote that this was the moment he felt the interview move beyond trauma or delusion. The boys were no longer describing fear. They were describing function. The later sessions grew darker. The boys spoke of what happened to children who resisted learning, of rooms carved deeper into the rock where sound behaved differently, of lessons that broke minds that could not adapt. Yet they described these outcomes without pity, as one might describe mechanical failure. When shown religious symbols, both boys showed mild confusion. When shown maps of the tunnel system as investigators understood it, they corrected details calmly. You don't see the lower parts, Daniel said once. Those are not for surface people. The final confession came when Brennan asked the question no one else would. Did the shepherd ever hurt you? Michael tilted his head slightly and answered, not the way you mean. Then he added something that never appeared in any official report. He changed what we could be hurt by. The recordings ended shortly after. Within days, the tunnel beneath the Chamberlain house was permanently sealed. The official position became psychological trauma complicated by shared delusion. But inside the sealed federal files, Brennan wrote a final line that would not be declassified for decades. These children do not describe captivity, they describe initiation. And with that, the investigation stopped searching for a crime. It began trying to forget a revelation. The official end of the investigation did not bring peace to Millertown. It brought division. Once the tunnels beneath the Chamberlain house were sealed and the federal classification quietly shifted from criminal abduction to psychological anomaly, the town was left with no villain to punish and no explanation it could accept. And when a community cannot place fear outside itself, it turns inward. At first, the Reeves boys were treated with fragile sympathy. Neighbors brought casseroles. Church members prayed over them. Teachers attempted to return them to ordinary classroom routines. But the longer Michael and Daniel remained distant, watchful and unnervingly calm, the tone began to change. Parents noticed small things. Their children came home unsettled after speaking with the boys. Nightmares became common. One child claimed Michael had told him, "The ground listens when you stand still long enough." Another said, Daniel asked whether he ever heard his own name when no one was around. These may have been rumors, but in a frightened town, rumors spread faster than facts. By the summer of 1972, the Reeves family was being avoided at the diner. Whispers followed them through grocery aisles. Anonymous letters began arriving at their farmhouse. Some accused Dorothy of hiding the truth. Others accused her of being part of it. One warned her to take the boys away before the town pays the price. Dorothy lost her job at the library without formal explanation. The boys were withdrawn from school after multiple parents threatened to pull their own children out. The sheriff urged calm publicly, but privately advised Dorothy to keep the boys indoors after dark. Isolation became survival. Michael and Daniel changed in subtler ways. They slept rarely and walked at night. Dorothy once found them standing at the edge of the woods behind the house before dawn, barefoot in frost, staring toward the tree line. When she begged them to come inside, they did without resistance, without emotion. By 1974, the pressure became unbearable. One night in late March, the Reeves farmhouse was found empty. Most belongings remained. Food was still in the cupboards. The beds were stripped but not taken. Dorothy, Michael, and Daniel Reeves left Millertown without saying goodbye. No forwarding address was ever filed. They vanished again, this time by choice. For decades, the case faded into rumor and forgotten files. The parking lot was built over the remains of the Chamberlain property. Life resumed its surface patterns. Children grew up. New families moved in. The town learned how to forget. But forgetting did not end the story. Between 1975 and 2005, 9 children disappeared from rural towns within a 100-mile radius of Millertown. All were between 8 and 13 years old. All vanished in late afternoon hours. All disappeared while alone on country roads. None were ever found. In several cases, other children reported seeing a man who looked almost familiar in the days before the disappearances. A man whose face resembled someone they trusted, but felt wrong when they tried to remember it clearly. The pattern was never officially acknowledged. The files remained separate, unconnected, incomplete, and yet quietly, among state investigators who had worked the original Reeves case, a belief settled in that something had never truly been sealed beneath that parking lot, only buried deep enough for people to stop listening. More than 50 years have passed since Michael and Daniel Reeves walked out of the Pennsylvania woods and into American mystery. Officially, their case was closed as an unresolved psychological anomaly. Unofficially, it never truly closed at all. It simply sank beneath the surface of public memory, joining the thousands of strange cases filed away under the quiet label of unknowable. The boys were last seen as children. What they became is something no record can fully describe. Dorothy Reeves died in obscurity far from Millertown. Michael Reeves passed away in his 40s under circumstances medical examiners called natural. Daniel Reeves was never conclusively located after the family fled. No photographs linking him to any adult identity were ever confirmed. To this day, his status remains officially listed as whereabouts unknown. The Chamberlain house is gone. The tunnel is sealed. A parking lot now covers the ground where federal agents once stood in disbelief. People park their cars there every day without realizing what history may lie beneath the concrete, beneath the ordinary, beneath the part of the world that feels safe because it is familiar. And yet, the question remains, if the boys were lying, why did they never contradict each other? If they were delusional, why did the physical evidence partially align with their claims? And if they were telling the truth, what does that mean for every quiet road, every abandoned structure, every place people assume has already been mapped and understood? What the Reeves case ultimately forces us to confront is not the mystery of 2 children, but the limits of certainty itself. Law enforcement is built on evidence. Psychology is built on patterns. But history shows again and again that some events refuse to remain inside those boundaries. Perhaps the shepherd was a shared hallucination born from trauma. Perhaps the tunnels were misinterpreted ruins. Perhaps the boys built a survival mythology too powerful to dismantle. These explanations are comforting, because they keep the unknown at a safe distance, but the problem with comfort is that it often arrives before truth does. The disappearances that followed in nearby towns were never officially connected. The sightings of familiar-looking strangers were never formally investigated as a pattern. Each case was treated separately, quietly, conveniently, because connecting them would have required reopening a door no agency wanted to face again. History is full of sealed doors. Some are sealed because they lead nowhere. Others are sealed because someone is afraid of what might still be listening from the other side. If Michael Reeves was right, if there truly are places in this world where the rules of the surface no longer apply, then the most frightening part of this story isn't what the boys encountered beneath the earth. It's that they came back. And if Daniel chose not to return at all, then somewhere, in some unrecorded space between mapped land and forgotten ground, a child who walked willingly into the dark may still be walking, waiting, listening, learning. Tonight's story does not ask you to believe in monsters. It asks you to recognize how thin the line is between what we understand and what we only pretend not to see. Because every unexplained case, every sealed file, every contradiction left unresolved teaches us the same quiet lesson. Not all mysteries fade with time. Some simply grow patient. Now we want to hear from you. What do you believe really happened to the Reeves boys? Were they victims of trauma or witnesses to something buried deeper than the investigation itself? Tell us in the comments and let us know. What state are you watching from right now? If you want more stories like this, true cases that sit at the edge of history and the unknown, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss what comes next. In our next episode, we'll uncover another sealed case where witnesses vanished. Evidence contradicted itself, and the truth was quietly labeled impossible. Until then, stay curious, stay observant, and remember, some roads only look empty because you're standing in the light.